Hello everybody, it's me Steering here again with another PAA video. Today I am here with Nightfront.
Hello.
Nice one, nice. We are doing I know it says Season 6 on my screen right now, just to show the markings and ratings. We are doing the Radical Red plus Cap PRs. This is Reshiram div at the moment. Just on the screen right now, it's just, again, as to the marking system, just the way we've rated all the teams. As you can see below, offense out of 10, defense out of 10, utility out of 10, versatility out of 5, priority out of 2, types out of 10, speed tiers out of 3. If you want to read that over, you can pause the video for yourself and read that over. Disclaimer as well, it does not mean you're going to be bad or that your team will perform badly. This is just our opinions based on everything above. Anything you want to add, Knife Front?
Nope, that pretty much covers everything.
Perfect, perfect. All right, so now we're going to get into the rankings here. Starting with number 16, we have Doge the Noob, G-Zap, Screamtailed, Swampert, Spectrier, Pyroar, Plasmanta, Orthworm, Mega Flapple, Vullaby, and Dotler. Issues with this team. First thing you can see, obviously, the type charts, quite subpar, as you can see. And I think the big thing is the utility on this team is, very much lackluster. The late addition of Dotler definitely helps with it, but having Vullaby as your removal and one of your pivots, your dark type, your knockoff, definitely hinders you a bit here.
So this team really suffers from the fact that Vullaby does most of its heavy lifting. It does so much heavy lifting for this team, and you're asking Vullaby to do all of that. On top of the fact that your speed tiers they're all the same speed. Everything is the same speed on this team.
There's a lot of base 100. Spectre is also not the best. I think you had Kitsono before. I think it may have been a better mod to keep, just with what it did for you. Gave you pivot, gave you priority, which doesn't really pop off the screen here. And you also have a huge speed gap between Plasmanta and Orthworm. Otherwise, that's most of it. Right, the offense is, its bigger, sort of prouder trait here. And the core of Pert Screamtail is always nice, but I would have loved to see, a better supporting cast beyond Pert.
I would also love to see another physically defensive Mon, other than Orthworm here, or like some extra special defense as well. That would just help anchor the team a little bit more defensively rather than putting it on the back of basically 3 or 4 Pokemon.
Yeah, there's just not a lot of depth here, and the depth sort of leans on, a Vullaby of all Mons to provide. And it's not usually a Mon that can provide that defensive utility to that extent. That's basically it. We gave it a 24 out of 50. By the way, again, most teams are going to rank within, the 20 to 40 range. I think the highest team we have is in and around
35?
Yeah, right. So all within
Most
good
teams are going to
range.
rank in the 25 to 32 range, from what I've seen.
Yeah, so they're in. They're all within a really close thing, meaning one draft isn't crazy better than another. Anyways, on to the next team here. We have Zach Parrott, Kerfluffle, Samurai Hisui, Saharaja, Ferrothorn, Latios, Skeleturge, Galvantula, Arbok, Spinda, Arkin. Nightfront, do you want to start us off with this one, or?
There's not a whole lot to say here. It's just kind of just a mixed bag of everything. Like, nothing is outright bad, but nothing stands out above everything else. He's got, like, a lot of the stuff you want in a team. It's just aren't any real standout Pokemon on this team.
I think a lot of what we saw as well was with the utility was quite lackluster again. Your defogger being, a Latios and an Arkin isn't the most prominent thing for the world. Latios can do it, sure, but you generally want to be dropping those Dracos. And Spinda as a spinner is also quite subpar, to say the least.
You also don't necessarily want to spin with Spinda when you're playing a contrary Spinda, because that just lowers your own speed.
That's Also very possible. The other thing as well that we obviously Ferrothorn is a trappable steel, which isn't great, especially when a lot of your defensive core leans on Ferrothorn, as most teams will with it. It's also
Like
more of a personal thing.
if you lose Ferrothorn here, I don't think you have a great answer to fairies. Like Skeleturge can do it, but a lot of fairies have coverage that can hit Skeleturge pretty hard.
That's true. And then, I mean, I will say the offense is also fairly lackluster with, Kerfluffle, Samu H, Saharaja, Latios being sort of your offensive core. I just think is Saharaja and Samurai Sui don't have, the stats to necessarily break open teams like they should. And Saharaja especially wants to be defensive. Speaking of which, the defense, I do really, I enjoy the Saharaja Ferrothorn core on this team. I enjoy the defense generally on this team. I just think, you want to have the removal with it.
I think you also want a bit more standout defense because like everything's in that like 100 to 120 range. There's like almost no stats on this entire team that exceed that range, and like that's great to have as your like third or fourth option. Sometimes even the second option in that range in a given stat. But you generally want to have at least one or two extremes on a team.
Mm-hmm. The best description for the team is it's very average. Right? There's no strongest point to it. The defense is, the stronger point, but there's no strongest point, but there isn't anything, super, super weak about it either.
It's got a little bit of everything, but nothing that stands out to give it that extra buff while also having everything else to go
To
with it.
us, not enough of everything, I guess is what I'd say. Anyways, next team, we have Trick Room, the team, Iron Hands, Enamorous T, it's debug by the way, Melmetal, P2, Mollux, Claydol, Appleton Mega, Gyarados, Gloom, Breezely. Breezy is a baby Catmon, so we decided, we're not going to include it on the
Would you
document
please
here.
educate them on its type at least so
It
they are
is a
aware?
poison flying type, so it does just kind of add to the weaknesses on the type chart that already looks not the best in the world.
Just for the purposes of the type chart, so you can get a visual of it, I will put this on here for you so you guys can see what that does to the type chart before I change it back.
Perfect. Yeah, so it's not, too great for you. On top of that, just in terms of, obviously the speed tiers are, not the best in the world. Going for a Trick Room team will generally do that for you. But even in that scenario, I wish you did have. Actually, the Trick Room setters are all right.
Like the Trick Room setter of P2 Claydol, they're pretty good Trick Room setters. The
Enam as
issue
well.
with this, um, the issue with this is you still even on dedicated Trick Room teams, you still want that fast Pokemon that puts in just it does that does something for you.
Mons
Like
that say just in case my Trick Room fails, I have a fail safe as well. Because there are always scenarios where you can't keep that Trick Room up the entire game. You need to be able to have that fail-safe option, that backup, that allows you to, make sure that you're not entirely fucked when Trick Room doesn't work. Also, the defense leans on Melmetal, which is kind of funny.
yeah, this entire team's entire defensive resist just is anchored entirely on Melmetal, who is very easy to trap. And also your special defense on Melmetal, it's your best resist to a lot of primarily specialty attacking types, which can
Specifically
crumple
Psychic.
Melmetal.
Psychic and Ice are the big ones on that front. But yeah, once Melmetal is gone, your weaknesses that you already have just get so much worse, and you don't have any resistance to them anymore. You getting easily worn down by psychic types, by flying types, both of which are common, and not having a dark type of your own to be able to deal with a lot of it is, not the best thing to see in the world. I do think otherwise, in terms of a trick room team, would have loved to see. I think Nightfront mentioned it to me earlier. An Ursaluna on this team. I know it's gone
Yeah,
now, but
if you were trying to go Trick Room, I don't know. Let me take a look at the draft and see if it was picked before it got to him.
it was picked
We're
third
looking at
round.
a
It was third round.
debug, right?
It was third round.
Yeah,
So
I
you could have gotten him.
think if you're planning to go Trick Room, you go first pick Ursaluna. It is the Trick Room Pokemon.
Mhm. But
It is the mascot for that
yeah,
archetype.
it absolutely is, and it's again one of the strongest AA Pokemon in the format as well. But I'm curious. I'm really curious to see how Trick Room here does. It's not something we've seen commonly in AA. I know it hasn't worked to the fullest when we have seen it, but let's see if Debug can turn that around
I would
again.
also like to see what the Mega Flapple can do, as I think that, or the Appleton,
Appleton,
excuse me, not Flapple. As that's just a very interesting mon to see,
that's
and
true.
I don't know what that's gonna do.
Exactly as well. Again, ranking 25 out of 50. Doge was 24. Zach was 24.5. All very close so far. Including our next team at 25.5. We go on to Hacker now. Dreadnought Mega, Tapu Fini, Blacephalon, Noivern, Gliscor, Ditto, Hariyama, Type Null, Slurpuff, Sligosui, and Snuggalo. I believe Snuggalo is. I believe it is also. I think it's also just fucking normal poison or something. Or no, it's poison flying. It's poison flying. The last one was normal poison. Again, another
No,
mon
the
that.
last one was Poison Fly.
Okay. Well, regardless, I do remember it's another mon that adds to the weaknesses and doesn't actually provide a resistance to this team. In which the type chart is bad. Slicka
It's
Husui.
Electric Poison. It's
Thank.
Toxicity,
It's toxicity type. Thank you. Um, Electric poison
which
does
does
actually
this
help
to
a
the
bit.
type chart, which is not the worst. We've seen much worse, but
We have seen much worse. The big thing I don't like about it is Sliggoo Hasui is your steel type. Not only is it a trappable steel, but it is also a middle stage, and you're
it
relying
it,
on it.
it my, well, it's got the defensive stats. I think you can rely on it as a middle stage, but the problem is when you do this,
It's
uh,
yikes,
you have literally no flying, no psychic resist at all,
and practically no
which,
fair resist to begin with.
I mean, it doesn't add a fairy resist.
I'm just saying in
And then
general.
on top of that, a lot of your key resistances are coming from Blacephalon,
That's
who is definitely known for its defensive prowess.
yes, of course. Yeah, your fairy type weakness especially is very concerning, especially because it's an unimmutable type. Blacephalon being the resist to it, with its 53, 53, 79 is definitely not the best thing to see. I will say, in terms of good things, the utility is really nice on this team.
Oh
Um,
yeah, no, the utility here absolutely fantastic. By far the best we've seen so far. Um,
I do also think that the offense is going to be, quite interesting to see, but the defense, like the offense and the defense, are both going to be very interesting to see on this team. Feeney does provide, hold a lot of the load together as well. But
like
Feeney, Blacephalon,
Feeney,
Noivern, Dreadnought, Mega, Hariyama, Slurpuff is nothing to scoff at.
Feeney is going to be the defensive anchor of this team in conjunction with Sligo Hisui, and of course Blacephalon. We can't forget about that defensive prowess.
Of course, of course. But there is, quite a few offensive weapons that would be very interesting to see and how they perform during this format. All right, I think that's most about Hacker's team. We go on to the next team here. That would be Amstan. That is Archeops, Manaphy, Tapu Koko, Necturna, and Nihilape, Dragalge, Meganium, Aromatisse, Klinklang, Wheezing. And this is a 26.5 ranking. Nightfront, do you want to?
So,
Yep, go for it.
so I have a couple things to say here. For one, the type chart is absolutely atrocious. Despite what the weaknesses say, this type chart is absolutely atrocious. You have three fairy types, two ghost types, two grass types,
Two
just
poisons,
two poison types that are both defensive. Um,
two
this
fairies that are
team is
both
all over the
defensive, two
place
ghosts
with
that
its
can be
typings.
defensive. The big thing that holds this team, higher than the four below it, is its offense is very, very strong, along with its versatility. It can, Archeops, Manaphy, Coco punch holes through so many teams.
And then you have good bulkier offense like Annihilate there and Manaphy to an extent as well. And then you have Kling Clang can actually, if it gets the turn, can
Very
put
solid
in some
offensive
work
ability too.
offensively. But
Yep.
then you also have good defensive Pokemon with your Meganium, your Necturna, your Weezing, your Dragalge. The problem is there's your defensive cores have so many overlapping types.
It's a
That's
lot
the big issue with
of
this team.
Pokemon that have, good potential, good capability, but that don't synergize that well with each other to create this. I think as well, removal would be really nice to have because Coco Archeops is not real removal as far as I am concerned. Nocturna Sketch will be very interesting to see as well. I will make that known to everyone. Sketch is legal. One move only for this mon though. But it'll be very interesting to see it. I do just think though it's a lot of mons that are, solid mons but not together. If you know what I mean. Knight, anything else to say on it?
Not a whole lot here. I think if you can find a way to make some trades that clean up the whole type chart, it will solve a lot of your issues. Because like there's just so many overlapping types that roles get overlapped left and right. Like all the Pokemon here are good Pokemon. They just don't have the best synergy, and I think if you clean this up, this team would skyrocket in points
I
potentially.
also think, you miss a lot of types, therefore a lot of roles due to that synergy. And that's another thing. Also, Clang Clang
I
being your soul steal is another
the
minor point.
lack of a dark type really shows here as well.
That's true. This is why we always say darks are, one of the, it is, at least what I say, the best type in the AA format. And I've been playing this format for a long time. Anyways, on to the next person, we go to Miko, the all Capmons team. Aromoth, Equilibra, Stratagem, Argonaut, Hegomogoblin, Pajantum, Chimera, Venomicon, Epilogue, Camino, and Brattler. I know Nightfront does not have, the most cap experience in the world, so I'll probably solo take this team if that's okay to do Nightfront.
I'll probably still
Or jump
comment
in.
a little
Okay.
bit, but go ahead.
Okay, I'll start us off at least then. Even with an all cap team, it's surprisingly better than a lot of some of the teams below it. I mean, obviously it's better than teams below it, but it's surprisingly well off. Speed tiers are a bit lackluster with the double 101 and the 100 with the 130 there as well. Very weak to ghost types. Chimera is your only switch into those. You don't want your normal and your dark stacked. A lot of times the ghost fighting is going to fuck this team to hell and back in that regard. I think it's a very, very solid offensive team. Aramoth is obviously, one of the scariest setup mods to exist. And then everything else, still provides offensive presence. I think the defense on this team is a little lacking. I think it's just really Equilibra, Argonaut, Chimera to some degree. But even, Argonaut, Chimera want to be offensive a lot of the time. And Equilibra still has a 121 special attack that kind of wants to abuse with the Doom Desires that it can throw off. So there's a lot of, defensive capability missing. And also a very, very, very bland utility chart there.
Uh,
From what I'm seeing.
bland is an understatement.
I mean,
This
Argonaut
is
gets
just
pivot, but yeah.
yeah, like there's not a whole lot here. I imagine maybe a couple of these things aren't represented on this chart properly, but
I believe it's actually just Argonaut and Venomicon that both get U-turn slash flip turn.
okay.
But it's
That
still,
that helps a little bit, but that's still just where you have one spinner, no defog,
yeah.
uh hazard settings kind of whatever, but you would still like a little bit more in that regard.
I do think you
Uh
have one of the most reliable spinners to ever exist, though, which is, very helpful. Being, the steel ground type Equilibra with basically Corviknight bulk. So that's a great Pokemon. But there isn't much to say about it. I'm hoping it does well because all cap is kind of funny. I know Nightfront had a little
it would be
giggle.
very funny. It would be very funny to see this do well for sure.
You had quite a giggle at the beginning when we were looking at these teams when you saw the all cap.
It was the very
So
first team we saw, so
that's always fun. But yeah, that's 27 out of 50. So, again, everything within basically zero point 0.5 of one another. On the next team is 27.5. It's a Rose, Giratina O, Colossoil, Celesteela, Jumbao, Inteleon, Infernape, Tentacruel, Audino, Leafeon, Tarantula. I know, I took most of the speaking last one, Nightfront. You wanna?
so this team, it's in a really interesting position of like the Mons are for the most part pretty well rounded, especially the offensive side of the ball, but it's just they can't do everything all at once, which is what a lot of these Mons want to do, or what the team kind of needs them to do, is to play like three roles at once for a couple of these Mons. Like this Giratina wants to be both offensive and defensive at the same time in a
Colossoil is a big
week.
example of that.
Colossoil as well. Like it's just they want to be offensive and defensive at the same time, and they can't be both, which brings this team down a bit. As well as just that massive flying weakness there. Just yeah, if you lose Celesteela, which is trappable, you just get destroyed by every flying move under the sun.
I do think, yeah, again, I think Nightfront hit most of the points there. The offense is very, very stellar. The defense is lacking. Colossoil isn't the most defensive mon, but it does actually take a lot of, the hits as your dark type. You are quite psychic weak. Outside of it, Steela holds this type chart together is another issue. And Steela we know is trappable as well. We're gonna probably see a lot of shed shells on the Celesteela week in, week out, just to be able to hold the defense of this team together. It's the first time we're seeing Gira O used in the standard format, so that'll also be very interesting to see. It is almost a test in a sense. Otherwise, I mean, the type chart isn't the worst thing in the world, which is pretty cool to see. You can always cover the ice weakness with like Delta Stream Steela, but it is just that flying weakness. If you can grab, resists to that flying type that isn't just the Celesteela, I think this team would do, a lot better in terms of ranking. Alrighty. We're gonna go on to the next team here. At 28 points out of 50, we have Fernach, Dragapult, Iron Valiant, Snailstrom, Carnivine, Sevi, Venomicon, Regirock, Tinglu, Grafaiai, Lilligant, Seaking. I do feel like this team drops off a bit after the top two, don't you think?
I don't hate the picks of Regirock, Tinglu, or Seeking. I think they were pretty good value, but I think the others could definitely be better.
Snailstrom's nice too. Snailstrom's a good mod. But as well, like on your offense, it is really just Pult, Iron Valiant, and then the supportive defensive offense of the rest of the team.
And then Seeking just clicking Fisher's Rend.
Yeah.
But
I will say, Pult Valiant is a very good offensive core. Don't get me wrong, but I would have loved to still see, more offensive, like dedicated offensive pieces.
we could also see potentially some really weird offensive Grafaiai sets because it also has access to one sketch move, but I don't know what exactly those would be.
That's true
Like,
too.
I think there's plenty of room for creativity there with that Grafaiai pick.
Yeah, with the versatility on that. I think the defense is also, it's a very solid defense. And I think that's what puts this team where it is. Tinglu, Regirock, Snailstrom, Carnivine, Sevi, very hard to break on that physical side. I did mention on that physical side. Nightfront, you want to take...
On the special side, your highest special defense is Regirock at 100, which leaves a giant hole there potentially. Which it's still a good mon to have defensively, and like Tinglu can add some special defense with its high HP stat.
So can Venomicon.
But where is your special defense?
Like, so can Venomicon, but yeah, that's the big one. The huge special hole on this team. That's, I think, the big thing we pointed out. Well, Nightfront specifically saw that. Utility, again, it's nice. Would have loved to see, a little bit more on, like, the defog, the rapid spin area. But you have something in everything, and that's pretty cool. Anyways, that's that team. On to a little jump here. The ranking isn't actually in here. I believe it was 29 out of 50.
Something like that,
But I don't know
yes.
why
Might
it's
have
what he
been
did.
29 and a half, but
It was in that
somewhere,
area. It was
somewhere in that.
29. Iron Bundle, Sneasler, Ursaluna, Mandibuzz, Silvally, Miss Magius, Empoleon, Sceptile, Lycanroc, Midnight, Camerupt, and Mr. Mime from Kebabs. The big thing about this team is holy fuck, the offense goes crazy. You see
And then
Bundle.
nothing else does.
Yeah, basically. Bundle Sneasler Luna is disgusting defense on the offense. So Valley has great support. Miss Mag is great offensively, and Polion can put up offense. Sceptile's offensive. Midnight's offensive. Camel's offensive. It's a lot of offensive mons that are all very capable of putting up hits. The
Oh,
defense,
even Empoleon and Mr. Mime can be offensive,
exactly.
which is really funny.
And then your defense is
Um,
Mandibuzz and
your
Empoleon.
defenses are Mandibuzz, Empoleon, and Mr. Mime.
Also the occasional Ursaluna.
I would argue actually the occasional Silvally as well, but
Again, not too consistent, to say the least, especially when they want to be, more offensive mons. Mandibus is going to hold the defense together. It doesn't help that the fighting weakness to the defensive core and just the team in general is awful. I know Nightfront picked that one out to begin with, so I want you to, talk on that one, Nightfront.
the fighting weakness here. Your resists are Mr. Mime, which is a good fighting resist, and Miss Magius, and then the problem is Mr. Mime is not a physical defensive mon. It's a special defensive mon. It can deal with the special fighting types. And Mandibuzz and Empoleon aren't, and an Ursaluna, like your big physical defensive mons, and even Bundle to some extent, they're not gonna deal with that fighting move. They are all gonna get just destroyed by a strong physical fighting move.
You would have to bring a third fairy or a second poison with your Silvally, or a second flying with your Silvally in order to be able to deal with the fighting properly, which isn't, the greatest use of Silvally all the time.
I will say Silvally being able to change that weakness into a resistance is huge for the type chart, and part of why it's not at the bottom. Because this type chart leaves a lot to be desired, but there's also so much going right with the team in terms of its ability to break an opposing team.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
That your opponent just might not be able to check everything, and your defense might never come into question.
Saying Silvally will answer all my problems defensively is not the solution. Otherwise,
Although
it's good.
this team might be one of the few teams that doesn't need to answer everything defensively, as it might fall under the best defense
first.
is a good offense category.
Yeah, it might just break everyone else first. Anyways, on to the next team here. We go on to Banana Soup at 31 out of 50. Heatran, Zapdos, Meowscarada, Revenant, Melodic, Zorark H, Audino Mega, Selgor, and 2 Unpokemon.
I'd argue one Unpokemon.
Fine.
As Cast Form did get a buff in
It does have 85s across the board. Fair enough. So one Unpokemon. The biggest issue that I found, at least when ranking this team, was a lot of the offense is also the defense. In Heatran and Zapdos and Melodic and your Mega Audino are your defensive mons, when Heatran and Zapdos' best sets are also its offensive sets. So you do leave a lot to be desired on that defensive side, when Melodic and Audino are the only ones that actually want to be defensive on this team.
Sorry about that. My internet decided to be dumb for a second.
All good, all good. You're up on anyways, if you want to say something.
And which mon were we just talking about? Oh yeah, going back to Cast Form for a second.
Go for it.
They also buffed its forecast ability, which creates some really, really interesting dynamics with that involved.
That is true.
Are you familiar with the changes?
Yes, I am. I am indeed.
Would you like to explain them for anyone who might not be?
I think you can, though, if you're already on it. Go ahead.
Let's see. Where to begin with forecast? They completely changed it. If Cast Form's holding any weather rock, it sets that weather upon entering. And also, if you use Weather Ball with the Cast Form, it resets the weather upon using Weather Ball. It's really, really interesting, the changes. And I think Cast Form's a mon that could actually come to a lot of games. And maybe set up, like, Rain for the Zapdos, just by switching in and allow the Zapdos to run an actual like
You could
offensive
also go
ability like
Sun for
Beads
the
of Ruin or
Heatran.
something.
Go Sun for
I
the
was
Heatran.
getting there.
Too bad.
I was getting there. And then it could create some really interesting. It could also potentially just play some weird snow or hail thing based on the coverage it needs, or if you need a defensive uh, switch for some reason. Just ice. I don't know why you would, but weird situations call for weird interactions.
Anyways, to
Um,
end cast form rant, it's a very good offensive team. There is a little bit to be desired on the defensive side, with a lot of the defensive mods again being offensive.
I will say I don't like that cast form and Zapdos are your only hazard clearers.
That too, yeah.
Like, because cast form is probably never running defog. Um,
And Zapdos can't be Magikarp and Prime C and Regen and P heal all at the same time.
well, you might be able to, like I mentioned, with cast form, skip the Primacy part of it, but it still wants at least two of those other abilities at the same
I'm
time.
saying Zapdos specifically, but yeah.
Yeah, well, like you
Oh,
could
with cast
set
form,
rain with
yeah,
cast form.
I guess so.
Yeah, and then
But
like get out.
in general sets. So it's really
Yeah.
just like the defog. The type chart could use a little work. Again, your rock resist is only Revocant, which is not the best in the world.
That being said, you don't have a major weakness to it outside of that either, so you can potentially get away with that.
My biggest
Depends.
concern was catching head smashes because you don't catch head smashes. Just to be frank,
I think an arguably bigger weakness might be that fairy side, because if this Heatran gets trapped and killed,
which you
uh,
can. Yeah,
what's
it's
switching in on a fairy move?
that too. So there's, those few things. But again, we are in the better half of the teams here. Very solid team. Would like to see a ground type as well, just because your electric type weakness is pretty bad too. Only having one weakness, one resist, and your resist being a Meowscarada. But that can be, solved with an immunity ability as well. So yeah, relatively solid team from Banana, 31 out of 50. On to the next team, Iceman Braun, Zamazenta, Goldango, Primarina, Zarude, Astrolotl, Helios, Poliwrath, Landorus, Swalot, Buffalot, and 31.5. Biggest thing we saw about this team was every single mon on this team has offense.
So every single mon on this team has offense, and also if you remove the Zamazenta, the type chart looks fantastic. But Zamazenta is such a good Pokemon, you can get away with that.
That is true. I believe even Zamazenta only is a ground weakness. Everything else is neutral, or better
Yes.
than that. The speed tiers, really solid speed tiers across the board here as well. The biggest issue I think that we ran into looking at the team is mainly that defensive side. You don't have any stonewall defensive mons that kind of want to just come in and take every hit under the sun. You got to play that
you
regen.
don't have any. You don't have any that want to do it while also being able to put out the offensive pressure. Like Zamazenta can probably and Zarude can probably play that defensive role for you in a week, but then you're losing that offense from your team, which
you don't want to lose.
would really hurt.
Yeah, it's a team that wants to start pivoting, using its regen to keep going through itself, and eventually, racking up the offense and playing the long game through its regen, pivoting, which isn't always gonna work. It's the best strategy you can pull off, and don't get me wrong, it's good, but only having Primarina as a root and no real fallback to that defensively can definitely put this team in some trouble. Also, the defoggers could be better.
So the defoggers could be much better.
So could the hazard setting.
And nobody sets hazards in AA. It's fine.
Fair enough. But otherwise, it's actually a really solid team. Looks like it's gonna be a lot of fun to use, especially with the high pressure pivoting all the time. Just kind of get in your Zamazenta as much as possible, kind of thing, and keeping your regen as your defense. So
I do like how almost every mon on this team can flip between offense or defense on any given week. Like even the mons like your Goldango, your Poliwrath, and your Buffalot, they can easily flip from offensive to defensive every week. Even Swalot can play offensive with that 93 special attack stat.
Yeah, Helios is the only one that really can't do that, but otherwise it's very solid. Now we're going to be heading into our top 3 teams, that being Zaylin, Cardinal, myself in some sort of order. Cardinal, Zaylin, myself. myself, Cardinal Zalen, myself, Zalen, Cardinal. Who knows? I'm just reading them off randomly. We're going to go to third here. That would happen to be Zalen, Victini, Miasma, Kingler Mega, Rose Ray, Donphan, Moltres G, Magnezone Clefable, and Wishy Washy Sevi. I'm not counting Dratini. Nightfront, you want to start?
So this team's very interesting in the fact that it has a really good balance of offensive and defensive stats all around the board, but a lot of that comes down to Pokemon being able to do both. Like your Magnezone, your Moltres, even your like Rose Raid and Mega Kingler to some extent could play both the offensive and defensive roles. Even the Wishy Washy, basically you're forced to run schooling, but that's fine when you're trading it. When you're trading an ability for those kind of stats, you can sometimes get away with that. And you even do have like an okay Trick Room setter in Victini to enable that potentially as well.
Yeah. Then there's, again, Nightfront's mentioned, most of the solid points. The bigger issue I think I found is the defensive side of the coin generally. You do have a lot of ones that, have that natural bulk to them, but aren't necessarily defensive stalwarts. Like G-Molt, for example, holds up a lot of this type chart, but isn't the most defensive, especially on that physical side, and often wants to be, a triage offensive set. When you're only ghost resist and mainly you're only ground resist because Miasma's bulk isn't the best in the world, it can get a little bit dicey. That's, the big one there. Obviously, Magnezone's trappable by a ground type. Not, the worst thing in the world, but it's there. And the speed tiers could use, a higher top-end speed. But it is, a very solid team all around. I wish Dratini was a real Pokemon.
I can't say I'm going to see too many Rad Red Galarian Moltres using Triage, as its only healing move in Rad Red is Roost.
Doesn't get Oblivion Wing. Sorry.
No.
That's Stab. Bleh, my bad.
You're thinking of Stab when you're thinking of Triage Moltres.
I went Stab.
In non-Stab, you're probably going to see much more defensive sets,
more AV
or
regens.
like your AV regens or your potentially like a nasty plot setup set that plays a really bulky style.
I just think the Moltres is very forced into being defensive on this team, which is what brings it down for me.
I think that's what's expected of the Moltres when it was picked, though, which I think is fine, and I think this team can afford to put that in the defensive slot pretty much every week and be fine.
Very solid team. It's number 3 on our ranking. Number 2, it's Cardinal. Jirachi, Keldeo, Lando T, Avalokasui, Cyclone, Tangrowth, Oricorio, Grimmsnarl, Lanoon, and Haunter. Again, top speed's not great. It has the best type chart out of all of the teams, being the only perfect type chart, which is, quite abnormal from what we normally see when we're ranking these teams. It does have, a very good all-around bulk to it, in, Rachi being the best AV regen mon, Lando T, Avalokasui and Cyclone and Tangrowth being these very good defensive mons, and Grimmsnarl being a great supportive option, while still having the offense in, say, Lando T, in Keldeo, which is not a real Pokemon, in Grimmsnarl, in Jirachi on occasions.
Even in Avalokasui on occasions as well, just because it does have that 130 attack stat.
132, yeah. It does definitely go hard. And the utility is not lacking either. That's all still, ever so present. The biggest issues that I think we ran into was actually, more of the offensive side, where Keldeo is Keldeo and one of the most immutable Pokemon in the format. Beside, Lando T and a lot of mons that want to be defensive. So you run into this issue of, do I have enough offense to break open teams?
And that's part of it, but it's also just which mon's offensive and which mon's defensive any given week. Like, a lot of them can flip between them, but you really need them to kind of be both probably in a given week, and you just can't do that. It's still a fantastic team overall with, no major holes. It just, I think consistency is going to be a question for this team.
That's true. That's a big one, obviously. And then, again, just that offense is another question, right? Where Lando T is going to hold most of that offense up, but is also a really good defensive mon and wants to be defensive on occasion. So just finding out what that one specifically is going to be is also going to be hard. And as well as Jirachi is never going to be able to play offensive because it is
I
your
think
defensive
the
special
Lando
mon.
point. I think the Lando point is also even more true when you look at your defog options, and it's the only real defog option you have.
I have like a
Obviously,
sweeping
you have
rapid spin.
rapid spin,
Yeah,
but I still think you'd probably want to find a way to tech defog for certain matchups,
for sure.
and like that would also kind of force it into that defensive role when you want it to be offensive.
Yeah, and then again, Rachi is your special wall, and the only one at that. You have 69 average SPDEF. Ha, funny. But it does only mean, Rachi is the SPDEF mon and has to be every week. Anyways, on to our top team. I'm going to let Nightfront take this. Nightfront, what is our number one team?
Unfortunately, it's steering. I really, really didn't want it to be. You can tell from how I'm saying that. I really didn't want this to be the top team. But it's Meloetta Pirouette, Sevian Milotic, Corviknight, Sevian Delmise, Krilliwatt, Muckalola, Golisopod, Magmortar, Zebstrika, and Tropius. This
35 out of
team
50.
this team unfortunately is just really, really well balanced. Like there's not a whole lot to say about it. It's just kind of balanced. Like it has good defensive and offensive options. I think it lacks a little bit in the offensive department comparatively to the defense, but I think you do have a good defensive core of a Alolan Muck, Corviknight, with some potential anchoring from your Krilliwatt, and
And the
Sevian
literal
Milotic
anchor.
is fantastic.
And the literal anchor, Delmise.
Literal, that's an anchor to your offense, let's be real.
Hey, you said anchoring. I had to make the joke. But anyways, some of the weaker points, again, I'm not going to give my own team strong points. The flying weakness is there, but there is, 3 switch-ins to that flying type, 2 of which are actually good. I do think the hazard game could be better, especially in the setting department. As much as I say setting isn't real, I could have, another setter there just to diversify the attack and the offense a bit. And the 281s, while not the best, is another thing to point out.
Yeah, I mean, the 281s are kind of whatever because Milotic isn't a real 81.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
As well as the lack of a
let's be
ghost type.
The lack of a ghost type, I think, is what might hold you back a lot in this particular draft.
Mm-hmm. We'll see how that goes.
Your normal type is Meloetta Pirouette, which is fantastic. But, like, it can't really hit ghost types, so ghost types are pretty free to switch into it.
It gets knocked.
Other than knockoff, it can't really hit ghost types, which knockoff's great, but if they have something that can handle the knockoff or just doesn't care about it, you could potentially struggle to break a good ghost type.
Alolan Muck can do, a lot of that lifting for sure, but it definitely can still struggle, I agree. But I think, yeah, I can't say anything. I mean, this is something we've seen before, though, and I also hate it because it usually ends up being a curse on me. But
I'm waiting for him to lose.
yeah, that's always the issue. I always get cursed when I become number one. But yeah, anyways, that is the Reshiram PRs. Hope you all enjoyed. If you, you can, like and subscribe if you want to. I don't really care that much. And we should be out with the Zekrom PRs soon after this when their draft's done. But yeah, keep looking forward to making more videos. Take a look out for more coming, and hope you all have a great day. Adios.